Hello, I'm Ann Petrick, Vice President of Research for Vistage, and I'm happy to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series. This series is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community, those experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices to help you navigate new challenges and possibilities. Now, one thing that is top of mind for many CEOs that we see in our research is how to manage through the uncertainty presented in the economic environment today. It's important for you as investors, as business owners, and working professionals to understand how to safeguard your hard-earned wealth and shield it from potential financial threats. That's why we've invited Vistage member and speaker Hillel Presser to discuss the practical strategies to help minimize vulnerability in the face of market volatility. As founder and managing partner of the Presser Law Firm, as well as I mentioned, a Vistage speaker and member, Hillel represents individuals and businesses in connection with the establishment of comprehensive asset protection plans that incorporate both domestic and international components. He's been featured in media and the press internationally, including Forbes, Sports Illustrated, The Rob Report, along with various network television stations. Hillel has represented some of today's most well-known business owners, doctors, celebrities, and professional athletes, and is available to come to Vistage groups. So welcome, Hillel. Great to have you back. Let's turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored and privileged to be here. Just to give a little bit of an overview of today's presentation, we're going to start off with a little bit of some background information about asset protection. We'll talk about some asset protection techniques and tactics. Towards the end, we'll talk about some international asset protection strategies and also some additional asset protection strategies as well. So probably the first question I always get asked is why I became an asset protection attorney. And as far back as I can remember, if you would have asked me when I was 10 years old, growing up in upstate New York, what I was going to be, I would have told you hands down that I was going to be an attorney. And it probably had something to do with the fact that at that point, I was very close with my uncle, and my uncle's name was Jimmy. Now, while I knew him as Uncle Jimmy, the rest of the world knew him as Jim the Hammer Shapiro. And Jimmy was actually one of the first personal injury attorneys to ever advertise on TV. And he'd get on TV and he'd scream at the top of his lungs, "I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. I'll wring out every penny, squeeze out every dime. You don't have to like me, just make sure you call me. I may be an SOB, but I'm your SOB." And he does it much better than me, so I'm going to take 30 seconds to show you one of his many ads.
I cannot rip out the hearts of those who hurt you. I cannot hand you their severed heads. But I can hunt them down and settle the score. I'll squeeze them for every dime I can. Every single dime. I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. But I cannot proceed until you call. 1-800-546-7777. You call, I hammer.
Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to show you my favorite ad where his face actually pops out of the zero of the 1-800 number, but I think you get the point. And I don't show you these ads because I'm proud of Uncle Jimmy. I show you these ads because this was 30, 40 years ago in upstate New York. Today, this is the norm. Every bus bench, who can I sue? Every radio ad, who can I sue? Every TV ad, who can I sue? How do I take the money out of the hardworking business owners, redistribute the wealth, and take about a third in between? So while there's hundreds or thousands of attorneys in every city trying to find a way to take your money, I thought it would be really neat to be one of only a few attorneys in the entire country that really teach you how to protect it. So I joke, but I say I am the lawyer that hates lawyers. So what is asset protection? And of course, I'll give you the long, boring legal definition. But to me, asset protection is the legal process of titling both your personal and business assets to put them beyond the reach of future potential threats and creditors and liabilities. And what we want to do as asset protection attorneys is we want to make it so difficult, so expensive, if not impossible, for anybody to collect against you that they don't want to sue you in the first place. You don't want to be the low-hanging fruit. If they do sue you, we want to try and settle the case for 5, 10, 15 cents on the dollar. Now, a lot of people say, do I have enough assets to protect? Isn't that only for the ultra wealthy? And the short answer is no. Every single person needs asset protection if they don't want to if they don't want to lose, what they've worked their whole life to obtain. And we've represented, 40 or 50 NFL and NBA players. And I always do the contrast of take an NFL player that signs a $50 million contract. Well, if they get sued for $5 million, they're not happy, but they still have $45 million left. Take somebody who maybe has saved up a few $100,000 over their career. Well, if they get sued for $1 million, they're wiped out. There's no coming back from it. So essentially, you can argue that the less you have, the more important the protection becomes. And of course, what if you already have an asset protection plan? If you do, that's great, that's fantastic. But every year your assets change, every year the laws change. So just like you go for a physical each year, you want to go for a financial physical. Also, a lot of people have a great estate plan and they think that their assets are protected. Estate planning is totally different than asset protection planning, and we'll talk about the differences a little later today. So why should you be concerned about the financial markets? Okay, number one is there is just so much economic uncertainty ahead of us. So we all know interest rates have been going up. They've been really inconsistent, but slowly going up. And maybe I shouldn't even say slowly. I mean, a year or so ago, they were in the 2 to 3% range, and now they're, well over, call it 7%. And when interest rates go up and there's economic uncertainty, bad things happen. People are paying more money on their credit cards. Mortgages are becoming due that they can't either refinance or afford the new mortgage. And when there's bad economic downturn, lawsuits always go up. There's also a lot of uncertainty with the evolution of AI. AI has been the hottest topic, the hottest keyword lately. Everybody's into AI. Well, they are saying that AI is going to replace so many people's jobs that there's really this big uncertainty in the job market. People are losing their jobs and people are fearing losing their jobs, which again creates this economic uncertainty, which then turns into lawsuits. Credit card indebtedness in the US is above $1 trillion for the very first time. Rates are going up. The credit card companies love it, but the people making the monthly minimum payments are finding a really tough time to do that. What else can they do? Find a way to sue and make some money. And also, more than 1/3 of Americans say that financial uncertainty keeps them up at night. So again, just in a really, really scary place right now with so much economic uncertainty. And anytime we see that, anytime we see uncertainty, anytime we see a bad economy, it leads to much, much greater numbers in lawsuit litigation. So what about navigating the storm? So what are people doing? Well, there's over 3 million new business applications that were filed just in July of 2023. That is a huge, huge number. Now, why are people doing this? They're trying to take their financial future into their own hands. Well, the problem is that the majority of businesses, especially the majority of startups, fail. On top of that, when you're starting a new business, you're spending a lot of your savings. You're taking on credit card debt, maybe SBA loans, but any way you look at it, you're signing more and more personal guarantees. And when you're doing this, you now have no weekly guaranteed paycheck coming in. So it might not be that you're making any money at all. In fact, you may be losing money. Also, financial institutions are going out of business. There's a shortage of liquidity. If I would have said this 5 or 10 years ago, you guys would kick me out of here. We literally have banks going out of business, and the banks that are there, even though the rates are high, don't really want a loan, and the credentials that you need to have to take a loan are immense. So many negative things, so many uncertain things going on, and we're seeing more and more lawsuits, literally a tick up every single month. So why do you need asset protection? I showed this cute little cartoon. It's two lawyers talking. One says, I say sue. The other one says, anyone in particular. And I always get smiles and laughs when I show this, but unfortunately, this is the reality. The lawyers are getting together and they're saying, who is our next target? You know, me being a Vistage member, you being a Vistage member, just like we're smart enough to get together with our Vistage groups and help each other, the lawyers are getting together to figure out who they can sue next. And the numbers are crazy. There's over 100 million lawsuits every single year, and that number is only growing. Lawsuits have literally become the next biggest business. There is a 1 in 4 chance that you or your business will be sued in the next year. And the average person in business is sued 5 times over their lifetime. Now, look, these are just nationwide stats. So there may be more litigation in South Florida than there is in Oklahoma. There might be more litigation for a business owner that owns a security company with 300 security guards than somebody with a tech startup and 4 employees. These are just the nationwide stats. There's a 50% chance of divorce. I tease when I give this speech in Miami, there's a 99.9% chance of divorce. And a lawsuit can cost you tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, even if you win the case. So whenever I speak to Vistage members, I always tell them the trick is not making money, it's keeping it. And the challenge I give to every single Vistage member is for every 60 minutes you spend making money, stop and spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. We're all worried about growth, growth, growth. And the only thing worse than not growing is obviously shrinking and losing money. So we don't want to be retired, backing out of the driveway. God forbid we hit a bicyclist, have to start all over, or maybe our teenage kids are driving our cars, they get in an accident, and we're sued because the car's in our name. So people always say, well, isn't that why we have insurance? First of all, I always tell my clients, buy as much insurance as you can because it's cheap and it helps you sleep at night. Well, the problem is that the majority of lawsuits are not covered by insurance. I don't know many people that actually read their insurance policy, but there's normally about a page or so of what's covered, and then about 30 or 40 pages of exclusions. My dad would always tell me growing up, he'd say, son, the big print giveth, the small print taketh away. Your coverage may be inadequate. Maybe you get sued and you have $500,000 of insurance coverage, but if you get sued for $1 million, you need to come out of pocket the difference between your policy limits and how much you lose the case for. Your insurance company might go bankrupt. Again, we just don't know these days, especially when we're seeing banks go out of business. And there's so many things that insurance doesn't cover, other uninsured financial risks, divorce, and the list goes on and on. So my point is that insurance alone is not the answer. You want to have your own asset protection plan to supplement your insurance. I call it the belt and suspenders approach. So 3 maxims of asset protection. Number 1, protect yourself before you have a problem. You don't buy the life insurance after the death. You don't buy the car insurance after the accident. You want to make sure that you protect yourself proactively. Also, you want to start with a basic plan and add firewalls as needed. And most importantly, don't look for a magic bullet or one size fits all. Asset protection is not cookie cutter. You need an individualized and customized and tailored plan to fit your specific needs. Everybody's assets are different. Everybody's potential threats and creditors and liabilities are different. One may be protecting against a second or third marriage, other from a teenager driving their car, but you want a plan that fits your specific needs. So many mistakes to avoid. I'm going to quickly go through the 5 biggest ones. Number 1 is hiding your assets. Asset protection is not about hiding. It's not about secrecy. It's about protection. And with a good asset protection plan, you should be able to tell everybody what you have and where it is. They just shouldn't be able to get to it. In fact, I tell every client that presume you're going to have to talk about what you own, because if you get sued and you lose, they're going to depose you under oath. And of course, you can't lie. Number two, titling your assets to straws. I can't make these stories up. I had a gentleman who came into my office once and he said, Mr. Presser, I'm being sued, but don't worry, I put everything in my best friend's name. I looked at him like he's crazy. I said, your best friend? What actually makes you think that your best friend has less legal and financial trouble than you? Can't make it up. The client was being sued. He put everything in his best friend's name. His best friend got a divorce, and his best friend's ex-wife took my client's assets. So you don't want to go take your assets and title them to other people. Titling all your assets to your spouse. We see this a lot. Maybe it's with a doctor client or someone who thinks they're in a more litigious industry. They'll put everything either in the husband or the wife's name. You definitely don't want to do that. Nobody's immune from a lawsuit. Nobody gets up in the morning and expects to be sued. The husband or wife can just as easily get in a car accident taking the kids to soccer practice. You can mess things up for estate planning or tax planning. So you don't want to take everything and just put it in one spouse's name. You never want to commit any fraudulent transfers. This deals with doing things after the fact. You always want to be proactive. And lastly, you of course never want to break any laws. Always keep it legal, always keep it ethical. So I don't want to just give you the problems, I want to give you the solutions. This is probably the most important slide we're going to look at today. And in the middle, we have something that's called exposed wealth. And I want you to think about this. Exposed wealth is any asset that you have that's in your name. So think about it. If you have any liquid assets, a bank account, checking, savings, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, brokerage accounts, if any of those assets are in your name, those assets are exposed and you can lose them. Maybe you have real estate in your name. That's exposed. You can lose it. Maybe you have shares to a corporation, ownership in your business in your name. That's exposed and you can lose it. Anything that is in your name or even in the name of your revocable living trust is exposed. And if it's exposed, you can lose it. I'll give you guys one guess of what's in my name. Absolutely nothing. I work way too hard. I don't want to do this again. Own nothing, control everything. Own nothing, control everything. If you own it, you can lose it. So if I've done my job correctly today, hopefully you leave this short presentation thinking I don't want anything in my own name, because if it's in my name, I can lose it. So enough for the problems, let's talk solutions. How do we fix it? Probably one of my favorite strategies is to transfer your asset to a protective entity. And you guys have all heard of protective entities before, LLCs, limited partnerships, trusts, the list goes on and on. And to me, it's the coolest thing in the world. You and your protective entity are totally separate people. So just like you and I are different people with different social security numbers, if I get sued, they don't come after you. If you get sued, they don't come after me. Well, you and your protective entity are different. You have a social security number. Your protective entity has a tax ID. You are two totally different living individuals. So take some of those examples that we talked about with exposed wealth. If you have a bank account or a brokerage account with $200,000 in your name, well, if you get sued, you can lose the $200,000. If instead your $200,000 brokerage account is titled to your protective entity, maybe your limited partnership, well, if you get sued, you don't own the brokerage account, your limited partnership does, and nobody can take it. It's literally the difference between keeping your money and losing your money. No difference with our real estate example. If you own a rental property that's worth $400,000 in your name, well, if you get sued, you can lose the rental property. But if instead you take that rental property and you put it in a protective entity, for example, an LLC, well, now if you get sued, you can't lose it because you don't own the rental property. The LLC owns the rental property. So probably one of my favorite strategies out there is literally getting the assets out of your name where they're unprotected and getting them into the name of a protective entity where nobody can touch it. Another really good strategy is to protect with liens. And I joke here and I say, poverty is power. What is a $100,000 Mercedes worth if you owe $98,000? What is a $1 million house worth if you owe $980,000? There are legal and ethical ways to put enforceable mortgages and encumbrances on your assets, whether that asset be a car, whether that asset be real estate, whether that asset be even your business, anything at all, you can protect that with liens. And if you have enforceable liens and mortgages and encumbrances on your property, well, as long as they're put there first and done properly and recorded publicly, well, if somebody sues you, they have to get behind that lien. So there's ways that you can make yourself as uncollectible and judgment-proof as possible by protecting with liens. Another really interesting way to protect yourself is to convert into exempt assets. And let me explain what exempt assets are. Exempt assets are assets that are protected by your state law. Now, this is state law, so everybody's state is different. And if you go to our website, it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. We have a button called Financial Planning Exemptions. I only tell you that because if you go there, you can click on any state and see what the exemptions are for where you live. But exemptions are assets that are protected by state law. And I'm going to give you just a few examples. So one of them is your homestead, your primary home. So in Florida, where I'm giving the speech from now, your primary home is protected. Whether your primary home is worth $500,000, $5 million, or $55 million, if somebody sues you, they cannot touch your primary home. That's why a lot of people love moving to Florida. And there's a few other states like that as well, Texas and Puerto Rico. Now, contrast that with, let's call it New York. In New York, you don't have unlimited homestead exemption. Depending on the county where you live, your house may be protected up to a maximum of a few $100,000. So just to show you some differences between Florida and New York. Also with pension and qualified plans, non-qualified plans. So retirement accounts. Retirement accounts in Florida are protected. Again, if you contrast that, let's take with California this time. California actually only protects your retirement accounts to the extent reasonably necessary for support. So I don't know about you, but I don't want a judge telling me how much of my retirement account should be protected and what I need to support my family. Certain personal property, wages, annuities, and life insurance. So again, in Florida, no big surprise, annuities are protected, life insurance is protected. But again, that's not the case in every state. So for example, in Georgia, and I'm going from memory, I think in Georgia, life insurance is only protected up to about $4,000. So you definitely want to check what the exemptions are for your state. If I live in Florida, I want to buy the biggest house I can, the most expensive house I can, and pay off my mortgage because it's protected. If I live in Florida, I want to up my retirement accounts to the maximum possible and buy as much annuities and life insurance as possible because nobody can take those assets. If I live in New York, I don't want a big house with a paid off mortgage because the house is only protected up to a couple $100,000. If I live in California, I don't want to max out my retirement account because it's not fully protected. So you just want to find out what the exemptions are in your state and then make financial decisions and act accordingly. There's also something really neat called tenancy by entirety. And when I'm giving a live presentation, I love to look around the room and ask the question, who's married? And most hands go up. And then I say, who's happily married? Keep your hand up. And it's funny to see. It's always the funniest when both the husband and the wife are there, or the two spouses. But I say that as a joke because tenancy by entirety deals with marriage. So tenancy by entirety exists in about 25 different states. Again, if you want to know if there's tenancy by entirety in your state, you can go to our website. Again, it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. and there's a tenancy by entirety button. Just click it and you'll be able to see if there is tenancy by entirety in your state. And what it is it's only for spouses. So essentially, if you're single, if you're not married, you cannot do this. It's only for married living spouses. So if there's a divorce, cannot do it. If one spouse dies, cannot do it. Again, only for married living spouses. And essentially what it does is it provides protection to the assets that are titled to both spouses if only one spouse gets sued. Let me give you an easy example. Husband has $100,000 in his name. Husband gets sued. He loses the $100,000. Wife has $100,000 in her name. Wife gets sued. She loses the $100,000. If the husband would have took his $100,000 and the wife would have took her $100,000 and put it in a joint account and labeled it tenancy by entirety, now if the husband gets sued, he doesn't lose a penny. Now if the wife gets sued, she doesn't lose a penny. The only way they can lose that money is if both spouses are sued. And normally, it's not both the husband and the wife getting sued at the same time. Normally, one may be sued for a car accident, one may be sued for something that happened on the job. So again, if you're married and have a great relationship and live in one of these 25 states, plus or minus, tenancy by entirety doesn't cost you anything at all. Another added layer of protection. I highly suggest it. The only time you wouldn't do tenancy by entirety is, if you're purposely trying to keep assets, separate, maybe you have a postnup or a prenup, so you might not want to commingle assets. At that point, tenancy by entirety may not be for you because it does bring the assets together. And then there's a few liability creating assets like a car or a boat or a golf cart, things of that nature that you also may not want tenancy by entirety just because you may not want both of you on the hook. I want to touch really quick on corporations because I see this the most with all the business owners, and there's so much misconception. So I just want to spend a few minutes here. Corporations are great to protect yourself against business debts. So why does someone start a corporation? Someone starts a corporation because they don't want to be personally liable if something happens. And a corporation does the trick. Instead of owning a car wash in your name, well, if somebody gets injured on the car wash, or you damage a car at the car wash, they sue you personally, you start the car wash in the name of a corporation. And now, if somebody gets injured, or now if someone's car gets damaged, they don't sue you, they sue the corporation. So corporations do a great job of protecting you and your personal assets against business debts. Here's the problem. Nobody ever thinks about this the other way around. When I talk to my business owner clients and I ask them their biggest asset, the majority of them say, my business is my biggest asset. That's my cash flow. Well, if you own shares in an S Corp, if you own shares in a C Corp, et cetera, if you get sued personally, nothing having to do with the business, maybe there's a car accident, a slip and fall, a personal guarantee, but if you get sued personally, the shares that you own in the S Corp and the C Corp are not protected. So if you own shares in an S Corp or a C Corp, even some LLCs in some states, just depends on the state, you want to make sure that you get those assets protected. And it's so important because people think that corporations protect them, and they do, but again, they protect you from business debt. They don't protect your business from being taken from personal debt. And while we're talking about businesses, I just want to touch real quickly about separating your business assets. So when we talked about personal assets, we talked about own nothing, control everything. Own nothing, control everything. And we did that because if you have an asset in your personal name and you get sued, you can lose it. Well, no different with your business. What do you think I'm going to tell you that your business should own? Your business should own absolutely nothing, because if, or I should say when, your business gets sued, you will lose the assets. Let me give you some examples. Let's say you have a fleet of vehicles worth $500,000 in your business. Well, if your business gets sued, you lose the fleet of vehicles. Let's say you have intellectual property like patents or trademarks. Maybe they're worth $1 million inside of your business. Well, if your business gets sued, you lose the intellectual property, the patents and trademarks. Let's say you keep $2 million in your business for operating capital. If the business gets sued, you lose the operating capital. So just like on the personal side, you should never have any assets in your name, the business side is the same. The business should never have any assets in their name. So maybe some alternatives are, instead of having the fleet of vehicles in your business, maybe you very simply create one new LLC, put the vehicles in this new LLC, and lease them from this new LLC to your operating business. Maybe instead of having the $1 million in intellectual property like the patents and trademarks inside of your business, maybe you very simply create one new LLC to own the intellectual property, the patents and trademarks, and you lease them from that new LLC to your operating business. So again, own nothing, control everything. That goes both for the personal and the business side. I want to touch briefly on international protection. Everything we've talked about today, we've talked about domestic asset protection. And domestic asset protection simply means asset protection inside the United States. Sometimes, and not all the time, international asset protection makes sense. And normally it's when someone has a lot of cash. Normally it's when someone has a lot of liquid assets. So maybe you've saved up a lot each year, or maybe you've sold your business. In fact, believe it or not, probably one of the biggest lawsuits we see is when someone sells their business. Because think about it. You sell your business, now there's a new owner. Nobody ever runs the business like you. Income goes down, expenses go up. And a year later, the new owner turns around and sues you for fraud. I call it renegotiation. So essentially, if you have a lot of liquid assets, whether it's personal or in your business, you may want to consider international asset protection. And the reason why international asset protection is so protective is it's outside the United States. So the US courts and the US judges, they don't have control or jurisdiction over the entities that are outside the United States or the assets inside of those entities that are outside the United States. So many jump holes and loops that people need to jump through to come after your assets if you have them internationally. So difficult, so expensive, if not impossible, and very few times are international entities ever even challenged. Just too difficult, too expensive. So again, if you have a lot of liquid assets, if you've had a liquidity event, maybe you sold a business, maybe you have an inheritance, the international asset protection may make sense. I promised to touch base on the difference between estate planning and asset protection, and I just want to make sure that I do that. So everything that we've talked about up until now is asset protection. And the easy way to think about the differences is that asset protection deals with life and estate planning deals with death. Think about it. Asset protection deals with life and estate planning deals with death. So asset protection deals with how do you protect everything that you've worked so hard for while you're alive, while estate planning deals with, okay, when I do pass away, how do I transfer the assets wherever I want them to go, quickly, privately, less taxes and less lawyer fees. And it's really important not just to have an asset protection plan or not just to have an estate plan, but to have an integrated plan where you're thinking about asset protection, where you're thinking about estate planning. And of course, there's other things that we think about when we're working with clients as well, like tax planning as well. And then also business succession planning, I think very, very important just to touch base on it, because we've talked about asset protection planning, we've talked about estate planning, but business succession planning is really essentially estate planning for your business. So essentially, it's when something happens to you, whether you don't want to work anymore or whether you become incapacitated and can't work, or if you pass away, what happens to your business? And if you don't have a business succession plan, well, your estate, your family is not going to get anything for what you worked your whole life for. Your whole business that maybe you've spent 20, 30 plus years working on will literally be worth zero or next to zero. You want to find a competitor to have a business succession plan with. You want to find an employee to have a business succession plan with. Who can you sell your business to when you're not here? And even if you don't have a family, or you're not worried about your family profiting from your business, it's still so important to have a business succession plan, because think about it. You have so many great employees that helped you get to where you are. So if you don't have a business succession plan, if you pass away on a Monday, what happens to all those great people's jobs on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? So really important to have a business succession plan. And if you have a partner, I mean, it is a must. I see it all the time. Two partners own a business 50-50. Partner number one dies. Partner number two waits until a week after the funeral, goes to the widow of partner number one and says, hey, I have a check for you for $500,000 for your late husband's 50% of the business. And what do you think the people say? They say $500,000. This business was worth $5 million. This business was worth $10 million. And they both then have to hire lawyers. They sue each other for the next 5 years. They spend millions of dollars in legal fees, and the valuation of the business just goes down and down and down. So important, asset protection. Protect your assets while you're alive. You worked hard, take those chips off the table. You don't want to have to start over. So important, estate planning. Make sure that when you pass away, your assets go where you want them to go, quickly, privately, less taxes, less lawyer fees. And also so important for the business succession planning, making sure that when you pass away or can't work or don't want to work, that there's a plan of what happens to the business. Very briefly, I put together this asset workbook for you. It's really nice. People always ask about first steps. What can you do? Number one is always educate yourself. If you go to our website, it's at the bottom there, assetprotectionattorneys.com. We have tons and tons of educational information. So I would definitely encourage yourself to educate yourself. Also, we've authored a bunch of books on asset protection. So if you'd like to read our books, just shoot us an email, mention that you heard of us through this Vistage webinar. And as long as you do that, we'll send you complimentary copies of the books. But after you educate yourself, this is a really good first step. I call it inventorying your wealth. And people always have so much more than they think they have. People always think about the cars or the homes or the business. But what about other assets? What about an inheritance? What about intellectual property like a domain name or a phone number? What about people who owe you money? Those are all assets. So this asset workbook will really help you get all of your assets together on one page. And until you do that, until you really assess and see what you have, you can't really go into protecting it. Now, please stay on because we're going to do the Q&A in a few minutes. But before we do that, I always like to end on a light, funny note. So I put together what I've seen over the years, the 10 craziest lawsuits. All of these are real. Don't ask me how all of them ended up because a lot of them settle out of court, but I just found them astonishing. Number one, a couple sued an airline over a cockroach sighting. The couple stated that they saw cockroaches crawling out of air vents, and it caused them to throw away their luggage in fear of cockroach contamination. Number two, a woman sued a movie studio for not accurately portraying a movie in the trailer. I love this one. A fugitive sued his hostages for not helping him escape. He claimed that the people promised to help them escape, and when they didn't, they breached an oral contract. Woman obtained walking directions, walked in the middle of the road, got hit by a car. She sued for bad directions. An employee was fired for helping customers during lunch break instead of actually taking a break. One of my favorites, a wedding couple sued a photographer for wedding pictures that didn't come out right. $4,000 just as the refund, $48,000 to restage the entire wedding. Customer sued for being overcharged for sausage by 2 cents and won. Any mothers out there, be careful. Children sued their mother for not spoiling them. They claimed that their mother was a bad mother by requesting them be home by midnight, haggling over dress budgets, and failing to send them college care packages. They sued their mom for $50,000. A woman sued a police department for allegedly making her listen to Rush Limbaugh's radio show while she was handcuffed in the officer's car during the arrest. And I saved the best for last. A man divorced his wife, sued, and won $120,000 because the woman had a, quote, ugly baby. The woman claimed she was naturally beautiful. In fact, she had about a half a dozen plastic surgeries, and the court deemed it as fraud. Here's the craziest thing. Not only did he win, this has happened in several countries. So we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. But really, again, just to kind of leave it for you guys, we all work very, very hard. We don't want to have to start over. So the challenge I give is for every 60 minutes you spend making money, stop, spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. If you like what you heard today, we come to your Vistage groups and we do the full 3-hour presentation. Just let us know if you're interested. And of course, if anybody would like to speak further, as long as you mention the Vistage webinar, we're happy to give you a complimentary preliminary consultation. I'm honored and privileged to be here. I know it was a lot of information in a quick period of time. And at this point, we'll turn it back over to Vistage for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hillel. I learn something every time you speak. And I love the idea of inventorying your wealth. I think that's a great place for everyone to start with, just to be able to get an accurate picture of everything that we might have. Couple questions. One came from an attendee. What stops people from researching the other LLC that does own your assets and suing not only your operating business, but also the LLC who owns the assets?
Sure. And I'm just going to try and turn my video on now, so hopefully you'll be able to see me. Essentially, asset protection is not about hiding or secrecy, but really it's about protection. And essentially, there's some ways to make your assets private and anonymous. I'll take that. Private and anonymous, okay? But we don't rely on that. So essentially, while you can make it private and anonymous, we don't rely on that. We rely on protection. So there are many things you can do to make your entities private and anonymous. So I'll give you one example. In Florida, and every state's different, in Florida, you have to tell who the manager of your company is. So people think that they have to put their name on it. Well, we can create a private company, maybe out of Delaware or some other jurisdiction, and we can use that private Delaware company, okay, as essentially the manager for the Florida company. But there are a lot of things you can do, tricks and techniques to be private and to be anonymous. But again, you don't want to rely on that. I can tell you everything I own. I can tell you where it is, just the fact that you can't get to it. So I want to strive to be uncollectible. I want to strive to be judgment proof. Privacy is just an added benefit.
Excellent. Are there tax benefits to having that other entity in Delaware?
Not really. Most of the things that we do are tax neutral. So essentially that means you're not going to pay more in taxes. You're not going to pay less in taxes. But actually, when you are doing some of these structures, a lot of times you can save in estate taxes.
Interesting. Okay. You mentioned business succession plan. What are your thoughts on employee stock option programs as a succession plan?
I like them a lot. So, I don't care, and I don't want to say I don't care like I don't care, but to me, it doesn't matter what the business succession plan is. To me, it matters that there is one. So whether it's a competitor, whether it's a key employee, whether it's an ESOP, and you're going to give it to all the different employees, I love all of them, but you got to have something. And again, doesn't matter if you have a partner, doesn't matter if you're single, doesn't matter if you have kids, you got to make sure you have a business succession plan.
Yeah, talk about the succession plan that is with a competitor. Is that selling your business to a competitor that's interested in growing their market share in the space?
Sure, and it happens all the time. So, look, there's competitors, right? And there's friendly competitors. So a friendly competitor might not have somebody within their organization who can take over for whatever that reason may be. Well, that doesn't mean that you don't want your name to live on. That doesn't mean that you don't want value for the family. That doesn't mean that you don't want your employees to have a job. So there's nothing wrong with having some sort of agreement with a friendly competitor, maybe two doctors. Hey, if something happens to you, I'll step in and I'll take care of all your patients, or vice versa.
Okay. Are you transparent about that with employees? I have to think that that would be an interesting thing when you're selling against them actively today, but knowing in the future that that could be a partnership.
Yeah, again, I think there's good ways to do things. I think there's nothing wrong with competitors, and there's nothing wrong with competition. You want to do things legal, you want to do things ethical, you want to have friendly competition. But I think the employees, I think the team likes to know that, God forbid, you get hit by that, and that bus that everyone talks about, that everything's going to be okay for them. I think it gives them a comfort level.
Okay. Excellent. So going back to something that you talked about, the homestead, I was interested in that. You mentioned that it varies by state and even potentially by county. So I know in Nevada, I had to submit an application at the county level. Are there links on your website to this as well, so people can find out what their state or even county looks like?
Absolutely. And if you go to the website, assetprotectionattorneys.com, hit the financial planning exemption button,
Okay.
hit your state, and the very first line talks about homestead. And it's interesting because in some states like Florida, you don't have to file anything to have a homestead. But in other states like Massachusetts, I was working with a client the other day, you get an automatic homestead. However, if you file, you get double the homestead.
Oh, interesting. Okay. How can you determine, is that publicly available information that you could go and determine if you had, if you were someone who might have filled out a form and you weren't sure about the documentation, can you go find that out?
Yeah, it should come up on the property appraiser tax site. So if you
Okay.
look at that for the county, worst case, you can always call them, but it should show right there,
Okay.
depending on the state and the county.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. I wanted to ask, so a lot of us are at the age where we're managing finance and assets for our aging parents. And can you share some of the risks and things not to do in terms of potentially like adding your name to their assets or taking on some of their assets? Is there any risk in that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the best thing to do, to the extent that you're doing things legally and ethically and, for the parents' wants, the best thing is to transfer the assets, while they're alive. And I say that because if you don't do that, something always happens. Someone swoops in there and steals it, whether it's a friend they haven't seen in 40 years, whether it's the cleaning lady. I have a case going on right now where, the brother and sister are suing each other. So the best thing you can do, again, to the extent that your parents have capacity, to the extent that you're honoring your parents' wishes, the best thing you can do is transfer the assets while they're alive. Of course, the parents need to feel comfortable that you're going to take care of them and things of that nature. But to the extent you can do it while they're alive, or do 80 or 90% of it while they're alive, it avoids so many problems after the fact.
Interesting. And would you transfer them entirely, or would you be like a co-signer or, have a on the
Yeah,
deed or something like
again, totally depends on the client. Some people, the parents like to keep it. So you may have a transfer of death, which just means a TOD account. When they die, it automatically goes to you. Other parents may want it out of their name because they may be trying to do Medicare or Medicaid planning, so they don't want to have assets. So again, you really need to see what the goal is and then fit the goal.
that? Okay, excellent. Last question I have, are there any regulatory or legislative changes that are coming up that we should be aware of in terms of how that's going to impact asset protection?
Yeah, nothing that we know of today. I mean, they're always talking about things. In June 2010, there was a Supreme Court case called Olmstead, not to be confused with Homestead. It changed some of the LLC law. It was followed by another case called Barber. So it does happen. Luckily, in the asset protection world, it's not happening every day, but every couple years, you do see some changes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your coming back to our community. I learned something new every time. So thank you for sharing your insights today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And don't forget that if you want to receive their book, that is an option. So you can dig deeper into Hillel's insights. And we will be sending a link to today's recording and our slides out to our attendees. Now, for our Vistage members, I want to make sure you don't miss the Vistage exclusive conversation with Adam Grant, and that is available to watch yourself or with your leadership teams through November 25th. And then for everyone, it's like back to school at Vistage. We have a full slate of webinars on topics important to you, from accountability to hiring to artificial intelligence across September. So you can register for one of our sessions. Coming up next on September 8th, next Friday, is De-Weaponized Accountability for High-Performing Teams. And that's going to be with Vistage Speaker of the Year, Robert Cujo-Teschner. And he gets great ratings within the Vistage community. Great opportunity if you haven't seen him come to your group, or if you're not familiar with some of our experts that come to the group, great session to attend. On September 22nd, we have Future Proof Your Talent. What matters to tomorrow's workforce matters today. So really digging into some hiring tactics and thinking about your employment brand from our partners Insperity. And on September 29th, I'm happy to host an artificial intelligence roundtable. We have 3 Vistage members who are going to share the results of how they're currently using AI in their business, giving you some ideas for how that might apply to your business as well. So you can register for any of these sessions now at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. So thank you so much for your time today. Thanks, everyone. Be safe and be well.